Alright, so I'm going to try to show you how to do some minor string clamp repair. If your string clamps happen to use a little diamond dust coated insert that fits inside of your clamp, and that's just held in, it's just a little thin piece of metal with diamond dust coating on one side, the other side's just bare metal, and it's got adhesive that's put on when they put the clamps together. And every so infrequently this could come unglued, and that's exactly what happened to me. A couple days ago I was stringing up a client's racket, and these are the clamps that I use all the time. These are my preferred clamps. I have a bunch of others that I could use, but these are the ones that I use, even if they're not considered the most premium one of the choices. But anyway, so these do happen to use a little diamond dust insert. And if you've got clamps, because these are all Gamma clamps, by the way, different eras, from different machines and so forth, but all of these are Gamma clamps. But not all of these use a diamond dust insert. The clamps that I prefer to use, this pair, does have an insert. So does this old chunky blocky one from a long time ago. It's got ones in there that are a different size, by the way, much wider. I meant to bring my calipers down. I'll go grab my calipers and give you the measurement on this, but this one has much wider teeth. You can see there, it's a much wider clamp. It still has 5 teeth. This has 5 teeth, but the overall clamp width is much wider, and the insert inside is wider than this. So it's important that you, if you're buying, this is not a new one. I'm just going to re-glue the one that came out back in. It's very rare that these things get in some sort of condition where you would need to replace it. But one benefit to having a clamp where these inserts do come out is if you wanted to totally revive the clamp and the insert was worn out for some reason, which should take forever since what's harder than a diamond, right? So diamond dust in there. Usually it's just string goo or buildup material from the strings, whether it's polyester strings or multi-filament strings, the coatings. That stuff builds up on here, and if you don't clean your clamps really religiously or frequently, then buildup can accumulate over time on there. So usually when people are having trouble with string slippage through clamps, it's usually that their clamps haven't been cleaned properly or they haven't been maintaining them to keep them in the tip-top shape. It's seldom that you would actually need to replace a clamp unless something else on it, was faulty. But these little inserts, because these string clamps that have inserts like this oftentimes get a bad rap on some of the forums and things like that, or if you talk to stringers, because they can fall out. It's very infrequent. I'm about to have to glue this one back in. This is the second time I've had to do it in like 10 years. About 2-3 years ago, one of these clamps, and I couldn't tell you if it's the same one. This could be the same one they fell out before, or it might be a different one, because there's 4 of these total. 2 inside of this clamp and 2 inside of that clamp, and I didn't mark them or keep a track of which one I had actually glued back in. But anyway, so if you have a clamp that has that, I don't necessarily see it as a big downfall, but a lot of people will say, oh, they're cheap clamps, they've got these diamond dust inserts, which I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing in the world, because again, if you ever had to, you could buy replacements and glue new ones in, and then it's basically like a totally brand new clamp, assuming everything else on your clamp is perfectly functional. So you're not really going to wear it out. But anyway, I'm not replacing mine. I'm just gluing the one that popped out, because that adhesive that holds it in eventually weakens. But again, this is only my second time in, say, 10 years of using these clamps that I've had to do it. I've had to do it, I think, twice on my Gamma starting clamp. Not all starting clamps have an insert, but Gamma starting clamps, and perhaps there's another that I'm unaware of, also uses a little square-shaped piece in there. The lighting's probably not good enough to pick that up, but maybe you can see that. But anyway, the inner surface there is a little thin plate of metal, just like this. It's just not shaped like that. It's shaped almost into a perfect little square that fits down into a recess on each side. So there's 2 little plates inside of here. So is it possible that Eventually, one of those could come unglued, yes, but it's not that big a deal. I don't think the Gamma starting clamps are bad. I have many different starting clamps. I've got a Babolat starting clamp, and I actually don't use it very often at all. I use a couple of Gammas a lot, and then an old Ignis clamp that's very strong that I use for bridging. Point is I don't think inserts are you know, a deal breaker on starting clamps or on string clamps, because there's many other reasons. I'm not going to go into a deep dive as to exactly why it is I prefer these particular string clamps over the others that I could use. Perhaps I'll cover that in another video, do a clamp comparison, comparing all four of these and the pros and cons and what's nice about them and why ultimately use these whenever possible. So I was stringing a racket the other day and using these, and this, I noticed that this insert had come loose, so I didn't want to break my stride. I wanted to just keep rolling and finish the racket, so I had the luxury of just reaching over to one of my other machines and grabbing one of these clamps off and finishing up the job. Here's a clip of when that happened. So anyway, I just grabbed one of these. I actually grabbed this clamp because it is the most similar in shape and size and stuff to the ones that I actually prefer. So in other words, this would be my second choice of all of these that I have. Now, I'm not sure if I said this, but so the ones that I prefer and use do have a little diamond dust insert. So does this old blocky style one. Oh, I said that, but it's much wider. And I'll go grab my calipers in a moment. Both of these do not. This is a 4-tooth clamp by Gamma that does not, it's just bare metal inside that is not polished smooth. It's, I don't know what you'd call the finish. It's a little bit porous. It's not quite sandblasted. It's got a rough texture to it. I'm not going to take this one apart because I'll show you what the inside of this one looks like, and it's very similar, even though this one's got a black enamel on the outside. But both of these do not use a diamond dust insert, so which is probably one of the reasons. And they're very heavy. They're cast from steel, it feels like, as opposed to where this is die cast aluminum. So this is a little bit lighter. But anyway, again, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds as to on a clamp comparison, but I'll open up this one and show you what it looks like on the inside where it does not have a diamond dust insert, and this one does. So I'll go grab the calipers in a moment. One of the reasons, there's again many reasons why I prefer this clamp, but one nice thing is when you want to take it all apart to do like a thorough cleaning, or in this case to glue that back in, you don't have to have any extra tools. Once you just spin this adjustment dial all the way off, it all comes apart. And this one is like that too. It doesn't involve any other tools and stuff. Once you take that little adjustment wheel off, you can get it all apart. However, both this one and this one, if you look, have a couple of little hex screws at the bottom. So even after you untwist the adjustment dial and get that apart, it doesn't actually come completely up. The two halves don't separate until you remove those two little screws. And I'll do that on this clamp in a minute. So before I forget, let me go grab those calipers real quick, and I'll tell you what the measurement of this one is exactly, since it's out of the clamp, and roughly what the measurement is on this one in case you've got some old Gamma clamps that need that wider strip, which is probably going to be harder to find since these haven't been around for many years now. Let me go grab that caliper real quick. All right, so we've got the caliper. So the insert that I'm about to glue back in, if I needed to buy a replacement, or if you need a replacement for similar clamps, this one, the height of it, which I don't think when you buy these they tell you the height, but just in case anybody's curious, the height of one of the pieces that goes along the teeth is about, the digital, my battery is dead in this, so I have to go off of the little hash marks. Looks like that's about 9 millimeters. It's more like 9.5, about 9.5 millimeters this way. And then across the width, which is, I believe, when you're purchasing them, for some reason 32 millimeters is sticking in my head. I don't remember if that's something I saw at one point, but this one measures from one end to the other. Yep, 32 millimeters. I don't know if that's what I said a minute ago. So this is 32 millimeters wide. This is a heck of a lot wider. This isn't going to be quite as wide as the entire head of the metal, and I'm not going to pull it out and remove it, but so like the teeth, the clamp, the head width of this clamp overall is 47 millimeters. So the insert in there is going to be a lot closer to 47. Obviously much longer than 32. So if you have some of these old ones, good luck procuring it. But anyway, so let me take this apart real quick. So like I said, it's super easy. All you have to do is spin off the adjustment dial, hold everything else together so it doesn't fall apart in your hand. Real easy. Once that's off, that lever assembly comes out, and then you've got the two halves. Take them apart carefully because there's some little springs in there that are going to want to fall out. So you want to keep track of them and where they come from. So this one's actually staying attached over here onto this half. I don't need to pull that off. And that's the diamond dust insert that's already on the other half, the good half. So that's not the side we're going to fix. It's this one. And I'm going to take that little spring out of there so that I don't lose it. But that's the side we're going to fix. So it may be hard to tell on camera, but this area right here, where each of the teeth have a vertical component, and then all this section here is slightly recessed. It's, you know, slightly got a little bit of a recess there, so that once this very thin little insert is glued in, it's all relatively flush, just like this side. I have no idea if the lighting is as good as I want it in here, but that's what it looks like straight on, and that's sort of what it looks like at an angle. Nonetheless, the key thing is you want to clean off the back side, any residue that's, or not residue, but any adhesive that's still hanging on to the back side of this insert. You want to get that off to get it a nice, smooth, clean surface. And the same thing for this entire recessed area. And again, I don't know if the lighting is good enough in here, but I'm going to hold this up to the camera, close to the camera, but if you look, especially over here on this last tooth, up here on this middle tooth, and this last, so basically the last tooth on each end and the center tooth, and a bit down here, you're going to see a lot of gray. And that's the adhesive, the old adhesive, that I'm going to need to remove that. I'm going to scrape that out. So hopefully the lighting is going to be good enough. I think you can see that maybe. So the part that isn't sort of shiny and silver, that's dull and gray looking, is the adhesive. And we're going to remove that and scrape that out and scrape it off of the back side of this insert. And I'm going to use my Swiss Army knife, or when they're this big, I guess you call it a Swiss Army tool chest. That's what I jokingly refer to it as. And it happens to have a chisel on the back side that's narrow enough and sharp enough that should be quite good for scraping some of that gunk out. I've got some acetone nail polish remover there, some Q-tips to swab that and try to loosen up the adhesive. We'll try to remove all that. Hopefully it won't take too long. Hopefully I don't have to actually edit this video, but we'll do all this in real time. That's the idea. I talked about the insert here. Again, I've only done this about, I think, 2 times in 15 years or whatever, so not to worry about an insert falling out. As long as you don't lose the insert, obviously. If this falls out and you lose it on the floor or something like that, or the starting clamp, obviously you're in a pickle there. But assuming you haven't lost the insert, you can glue it back in. Now I'm not going to use just regular old super glue. That probably would work, but I don't know. I'm a little bit paranoid about, like, what if I glue it in, cocked at a little bit of an angle. I'd like the idea of being able to remove it. Like, let's say somewhere down the road, I actually wanted to take these old ones out and buy new ones and put them in. If I ever wanted to pry this out, I'd like to do so without damaging anything. So I just use this, happens to be what I've got laying around. I'm not even remotely suggesting this is the best thing for the job, but this is clear Gorilla Glue, but isn't the super glue. This is Gorilla Glue Super Glue Gel, which is also clear, but I'm not using any kind of regular super glue. I'm using this, whatever it is, but it also is clear. This, you know, once you have it applied to your project, they want you to clamp it for like 2 hours, and then it's fully cured in 24 hours. So I'm not about to fix these clamps and use them on a racket, you know, 15 minutes from now. But they should be good to go for tomorrow. Anyway, so this is what I'm going to use. This is what I'm not going to use. May or may not use some nail polish remover to get some of this extra adhesive off. Don't need to worry about that half. We're just going to focus on these two. The hex wrenches are here just so that I can take this apart and show you real quick. If you have these sorts of clamps, these little hex screws down here are quite small. It's a 2.5 millimeter hex wrench to remove those. So I'll pull this apart real quick to show you what the inside of that clamp looks like for those that might be interested or are considering purchasing new clamps and want to know the ins and outs of them. So, like I said, if you spin this off, it comes apart somewhat, but not entirely. The adjustment dial comes off. Again, the lever assembly and roller bearing, all that comes off together, and then this is still sort of stuck together. So the springs don't fly out of there yet. And you also, but notice it doesn't really open up any wider, so you can't really get in there with like toothbrush or anything to do a thorough cleaning. To disassemble this to that point, you're going to need to loosen these like so. Again, holding these two halves together as I do this, so that I don't lose anything, any bits and pieces that are inside. But I'm primarily doing this to show you what the inside of the clamp surface looks like when you don't have a diamond dust insert. So now I can take these two halves apart. And again, I'm keeping up with these little screws here that are in that side, two little washers here that go between the two plates, and the two little lock, or not lock nuts, nylock nuts that have that go on the other side of this. So each half looks pretty much the same, so I don't want to spill those springs out, but you can see what the teeth look like there. The surface is rough, but it's like it's cast that way, or it's sandblasted something. It does not have an insert to fall out or to glue back in. So in terms of longevity, if you will, you know, you could say that this is, I don't know that it's going to last longer. It's going to be, let's say, more maintenance free, right? If there isn't a plate glued in that can fall out, obviously one can't fall out. So a little bit more reliability. So in other words, if I was stringing off-site, when I take, on occasions where I take my machine away from here to go string on-site somewhere, I would never just take only my pair of these and put all my eggs in one basket, because if something were to happen, or if that insert were to come out, and anything could happen to the clamp, right? You could be, it could fall on the floor and the teeth get broken off or bent or something. So point is if you're stringing off-site somewhere and it's important, it's smart to have backup clamps available anyway. But my point is I would always take some backup clamps, and in my case I would take a pair of these. But the point is, if these were your primary clamps, one thing you wouldn't ever have to worry about is a little thin plate coming unglued that you have to glue back in. So now that you've seen sort of what the rough surface that actually engages with the string, obviously when you're clamping a main, The main string is down here just below the height of the teeth. When you're clamping crosses, because of the intersections, the crosses get clamped a little higher along the teeth. So this whole area here, which is essentially the same area that the little insert covers, over on the other clamp. So when you clamp a main on this clamp, the mains get clamped down here where you have just all this surface area. That's why when you're clamping main strings, you actually want to bring the clamp up all the way, as far as it'll go, so that the main string sits all the way down on the bottom of the string clamp like that. You have the maximum amount of surface area contact of metal to the string, and when you're clamping mains, the string clamps are under more stress and strain. So you don't want to clamp mains with just the teeth like that. You always want to lift the clamp up as far as it'll go, which on mains means that you'll be here rather than up here where the gaps are. And then when you're clamping the cross strings, because there'll be mains running this way through those slots, the cross string will be just slightly above the bottom of each of these little valleys. So anyway, we're going to put this back together. And again, this clamp is pretty much the same inside as far as the gripping surface to like these. So I'll put that back together later. I won't take up time on camera doing that right now. So we're going to move all this out of the way. And get set to work over here cleaning up. This half and this insert. So first thing I want to do is see what I can scrape out before I even use any acetone. A lot of times this stuff will just come up on its own without you having to use some chemical. So if you've got like a sharp little chisel, something small enough that it'll fit into this, and remember this whole area that you're working is essentially recessed. And I know you can't see any detail what I'm doing, but just suffice it to say that I'm scraping that adhesive, that gray stuff off. Kind of rolls up. It's almost like it's a, I don't know, rubbery is maybe not the right adjective, but kind of curls up as you scrape it. In other words, it's not. It doesn't seem brittle. It's like it's almost like a putty type of material as you're trying to scrape it loose. And there's probably some other tool that would be far better than using my Swiss Army knife, but that's what I've got handy at the moment. And I'll wipe all this loose adhesive that's kind of all the stuff that I've scraped off, some of it's still sitting there on the surface. So hopefully you can see some of the stuff that's that I'm knocking off of there. And I've got a paper towel here that I'm gonna wipe this. So I've got a lot of it off there. So let's go and use a little bit of acetone. And just swab that in there. Hopefully that'll help release some of the additional adhesive that I haven't gotten off already. But I'm doing this down in those little recessed areas. This piece actually doesn't have a whole lot of adhesive on it, and the part that is sort of concentrated on one end, which is probably a good explanation for why it came loose. I'll try to show you real close before I scrape it. Hopefully the light's catching that well, or well enough. A lot of it's on this end. I'm going to try to scrape that off. It is easier to remove it from this piece since it is dead flat and doesn't have a recess, little edges that you have to work around. So getting the adhesive off of the insert is a bit easier. Alright, so that piece is pretty darn clean. So let me show you that real quick. Hopefully the camera is focusing and the lighting is decent. So that's the back side, and I'll flip it over just so you can see. That's the side that has the diamond dust coating on it, and of course I'll give that a nice cleaning once it's all back together, and it's not super dirty anyway, but I'll take the opportunity to clean it before using these clamps. So let's see what else I can get out over here. Okay, so we've scraped off a bunch of residue or adhesive off both sides. Now, I'm going to dry everything and glue them back together. Now this glue, like I said, this is not a super glue, this clear Gorilla Glue. And it says after you've applied it, you know, once your project's kind of done, to clamp it for 2 hours and that it's fully cured in 24 hours. So after that's another reason why I'm not super keen on trying this with super glue, is super glue sets up so fast that if you didn't have this in there just right, if it was a little cocked sideways or off angle, it might stick that way before you had a chance to correct it. So I'd much rather wait longer for the glue to set up and make sure that, and be able to maneuver this thing slightly here or there to get it in the absolute perfect position. And then just let it dry. So, but once I get this glued in and put the clamp back together, I will actually I'll put the string, actually 2 strands of string inside the clamp. One down towards the bottom, so that it's along this bottom edge of this strip, and then one a little bit higher so it's up in the teeth. So I'll basically one of these strands will be down where a main would be clamped, and the other one will be a little bit higher up like this, so that both of these strands are trying to keep some pressure across the surface like that. So that's what I'm going to do to keep pressure against the little plate after it's glued in. So that's why I've got that scrap piece of string. So everything's been dried off. Time to actually pull out the Gorilla Glue, which is very thick and it takes a while for it to. That's another thing, is if it's a thicker viscosity glue, it's a little easier to work with, doesn't get away from you. But I don't know, I may or may not need a Q-tip to guide it around into all the little areas. It's not going to take much. It's basically putting down a drop or two and then spreading it out. And another thing is this particular glue, it tells you, it says for non-porous surfaces only, i.e. metal, glass, plastics, lightly dampen one surface with water. So I guess the water is sort of an activator. So let me go put some water on this Q-tip, and I'm going to I'm going to wet or moisten this surface, not the back side of the plate. So we're going to get a little bit of moisture there. So now that I have a wet Q-tip, I'm going to make sure that this surface is wet as indicated. And now that that is damp or wet, I'll put the glue on. There's already a bubble of it there on the tip, which is probably more than I'm actually going to need. Well, I'm just going to touch that there. Yeah, that's a lot. I don't need all that. So I'm going to actually use my awl, which is very thin at the tip, to try to drag that glue around to different portions to spread it out, because I don't want it so thick that it comes oozing out when I press that thin insert up into the recess. I don't want this glue to come squirting out the side, especially once I have it clamped. I'm not trying to glue the scrap piece of string to the inside, so I'm just using my awl here to spread out this very thick glue to everywhere it needs to be, but I'm trying to not get outside of the recessed areas. You don't have a lot of room to work, so you may have to do a little bit of cleaning up after you glue it in. Some of it may ooze out the sides of the recessed area. Alright, so now I've pretty much got the glue spread out pretty well. And now we're ready to press that in. There's enough glue on this side that I don't think I need to actually apply any glue to this. I think this just needs to be pressed in. Give that one last wipe. Make sure it's as clean as possible. Doesn't have any of my oils from my skin on there. And now I'm going to put it in there, line everything up, and then press it down. And yeah, there's glue coming out all kinds of places, so I'll have to wipe that up. Probably going to be easier to just press on it now. And any glue that comes out can be wiped off now rather than later. I'm just pressing that in there, and again, because I'm not working with super glue, I don't have to worry about gluing this paper towel to the clamp. Anything that squishes out and oozes out, I'm basically wiping it up straight away. Make sure it's perfectly centered, not too high nor too low, and that seems about right. Just trying to press really hard to squish out any excess glue. Maybe a thinner glue would work better than this thick stuff. But you might have more trouble moving it around with an awl or whatever, a Q-tip. So anyway, that is now glued in. Don't see a lot of excess glue anywhere that I don't want it. That all looks good. I'll hold it up to the camera, let you see. Bit of glue on my fingers. So that's what it looks like now, glued back in. I don't have a bunch of glue seeping out of any of the edges there, but you can see it's centered. And need to push it up a little bit. There we go. It's come down a little. So right there is how you want it. Centered this way, and then I pushed it up a little bit so that the very top edge that's on each of the 5 teeth meets up with its little edge where the recess is. Anyway, so that's should be good to go. And now I don't want to disturb that. I could let that dry for a while as is. Prior to assembling it back together. But to put it all back together, I'm going to put that little spring back where it had come from. Turn this over. Get the two, make sure the springs are lined up and the two halves are lined up, and they are. That goes back in the back side. This goes on to the front. Again, no additional tools. And I want that to be pretty tight once I have the strings in there. And there we go. So that's how I'm going to leave it until it cures up. And I'm pretty confident that I'm not going to actually glue, when I open this up later, that those strings will come loose, that there's not going to be a string stuck to either side or any green residue in there. So that's it. That's how I'm going to leave that sitting. And hopefully that gives you a little bit of actual real world guidance rather than me just telling you how to do it. You actually have seen somebody do it, because who knows, if I didn't do this now, it might have been 5, 6, 7 more years before another opportunity would arise and present itself to cover this. So, I mean, this has been described or talked about on some of the forums and stuff, and buying these inserts and how to put them in and glue them and stuff. And if you contact Gamma, they'll actually tell you literally the name of the same adhesive that they use when they are done at the factory. That's obviously not what I'm using. I did not buy a special adhesive. Also, I think whoever when you purchase the little inserts, if you're buying a new set of inserts for your machine or for your clamps, I believe whoever sells those inserts also sells the adhesive, which is probably just a 2-part epoxy, I'm guessing. I don't know. Again, I obviously just went with that. So now it's time to put this other clamp back together. So get everything lined up. And then these little nylock nuts need to go in here into their recess. And these just need to be snug. These you don't want to crank these down like overly. Hence why there's a nylock nut on the opposite side. It doesn't need to be all the way in or all the way out. There's a spot that's going to be just right. That feels snug. That feels just about right. So the springs are already in there, so that's what makes them come apart. Loosen that up a little bit. And then put the lever back through and the adjustment dial back on. And there you have it. So hopefully that provided some help to somebody out there. I'm sure it will at some point. It's just a matter of time. This doesn't happen that often, and it's not that often that somebody's looking for help or guidance in how to insert diamond dust inserts. But hopefully what I've covered here not only would has you better prepared for gluing in a diamond dust insert into a string clamp, but on the off chance that the little square piece falls out of your Gamma starting clamp or any other starting clamp that might use a diamond dust insert. I don't know of any other companies that utilize the little square inserts like Gamma does. But in the event that your little square thing falls out, same thing, you're going to want to remove that. By the way, so the easiest way to do that, because obviously when you let go of a starting clamp, it closes, right? That's how it's designed. So rather than you trying to hold that, keeping that squeezed while you're gluing stuff in there, if you're not aware of it, it's very easy. If you want to make it a little easier to clean it, now usually when I clean mine, I just squeeze it and get in there with I've got a little special brush that I use. But if you're trying to get in there, and especially if your starting clamp is really, really strong, you just take the springs out. These springs pop out. You just grab one end of one of the springs and pull it. There's little nubs here, here, and here. Well, since this one has 3 springs, and here, here, and here. So all you're doing is popping it off of that nub like this, and then that spring releases. So you can take off all 3, or 2 if yours has, some clamps only have 2, some clamps have 3 springs, some have 4. By the way, the strength of a starting clamp, how much force it applies or how tight it squeezes a string, has nothing to do with the number of springs. By the way, these springs are called volute springs, V-O-L-U-T-E, and you can buy replacements. But the strength of a starting clamp is all about the length of this spring in relation to how far this opens when it's fully open like that. So obviously the spring has to be longer than the distance from this pin to this pin, otherwise it doesn't actually apply any force in this direction, closing it. So if these were a wee bit shorter or had shortened over time from compression, then then this clamp might not be as strong as it once was. So the point is if when you're buying these, getting the length is absolutely critical. So you need to measure like how much you have here. Anyway, the point is starting clamps, the strength of a starting clamp is not related to how many springs. You could have 2 springs be stronger than another clamp that has 3 like this. Just because you see a clamp with 4 springs doesn't mean it's any stronger, because if those 4 springs aren't particularly long and aren't particularly applying a lot of outward force down here at the bottom, it's not applying a lot of closing force up at the top. Anyway, once you have the springs out, it's way easier for that to stay open, and you can get in there and either clean that way, and this is probably what you want to do if you're trying to use some tweezers or something. Once you've got some glue in there in that little recess, and you've done everything that you saw me do on the string clamp, and you're trying to put that little square thin piece back in there, obviously make sure that you have it in there oriented the correct way so that the diamond dust coating is pointing up or towards the inside, the center. And again, that insert is nearly a square, but it's been a long time since I've done it, but I think it is a little bit longer along one dimension than the other. In other words, it's important when you put it in there that you have it oriented correctly. Otherwise, it's going to be a little too narrow this way. So the point is, before you put the glue in there, make sure you figured out the correct orientation of that little square so that when you go to put it in for real, you don't have it turn 90 degrees and then it's overhanging this edge here and not going quite to the edges here. So just, pay attention to what you're doing like you would any other time. So, and then after you've done that, or after you've cleaned your clamp, all you have to do is pop these springs back in. You put it on one nub, retract the spring, feed it onto the other nub, like that, and repeat. And there you have it. Starting clamp is up and running once again. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks.